If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Campers, hunters, what did you see out there in the woods that made you not want to go back? I work in the woods for a living and I've seen a fair amount of odd things. Carvings in trees, old beat up cars, random weird trash scattered through the woods, and a fair amount of animal carcasses. I've had instances where I've gotten spooked. Stuff like jumping big critters is always quite jolting, but I can recall one rather butt-puckering experience. I was working with a few other people at the time, spaced out of sight but not out of earshot. I crossed over a little ridge at least 2 miles from the closest road, in the middle of the woods, and I saw what looked like a full skeleton of a cow tied together with twigs and a little bit of twine. Whoever made it had fashioned it to be sitting on a log. They left a very neat pile of bones in front of the thing, and nothing anywhere else. I saw it and about fainted. Definitely really fucking odd considering how far we were off the road, and how thick and steep it was. I ended up getting the folks I was with to come check it out, really just for shits and giggles. I took note of it and we moved on to the next plots. I have a picture. Climbed up a tree before daylight in a remote holler in southern Ohio. Just as it was light enough to see, shooting light we call it, I hear a rustling coming down the hill, maybe 150 yards away. Cruising toward me is what I can only describe as a Tasmanian devil-like whirl of brown and gray moving in a straight line along the ground at high speed down a sloped hill and then off a steep 15 drop off and then under my tree and then through the thickest brush imaginable behind me where the creek was, and then eventually out of sight and audible range. So I observed maybe 300 yards of travel, although lost visual in the thicket, which all occurred in a very straight line at supernatural high speed. I'm in a perch with nothing else to do but put my entire focus on it and still I can't figure out what it is, and as it passed under me all I see, again, is a ghostly blur of gray and brown and leaves. Total time elapsed was less than 10 seconds. I've seen dozens of coyotes and several bobcats and yes, that is probably what this was. But its movement was so out of the ordinary at that moment my senses computed that it couldn't have been either of those. I got tingles and the hair stood up on the back of my neck. It's a mundane story but the actual experience definitely felt supernatural. Texas hunter here. Been hunting for a few years so I've seen my fair share of weird shit. Mutilated rabbits killed by coyotes among other things. Bobcat screams are also pretty freaky. But one day while walking on my property through the woods I heard some branches quietly break about 30 yards ahead. Nothing too weird about that as rabbits and coyotes bump into them all the time. It happened again but this time a little closed into my right side. I unholstered my .45 XDS, I like the compact version BC, it feels better, ready to shoot a hungry coyote. The day before my neighbor told me how a few women in Little Elm got mauled by some pissed off coyotes a few days earlier. So I was ready to shoot. Anyways, I shined my flashlight through the trees and didn't see anything. Kept walking but a little faster and I heard a high scream with low undertones. Didn't sound like nothing I've ever heard before, I swear it sounded like a bobcat fucked Batman. Took off sprinting back to my house a mile or so away. I'm near the woods tree line and look back to see a hunched shadow 40 yards behind staring at me. Like a person trying to walk on all fours. It was dark so it might have been my imagination. Noped the fuck out and got to my house. Never seen it since and didn't sleep for a few nights. At the time I wasn't hunting, I like to go for nighttime walks to clear my head but I never go without my gun. Stay safe, and be careful BC Ike what it was. Live in North Texas near a large wildlife refuge and a lake bigger than my hometown. One night I had a fantastic idea to go down the long gravel road to the dock with a female friend of mine. I'm from Texas, so I usually carry, but opted to leave my gun locked in the glove box by the gate. About 30 yards into the trek, the road was about 200 yards to the dock, I hear an unnerving noise on my left. It was as if the earth itself growled and rumbled at me. I looked around frantically, trying to pinpoint the sound. Nothing. We stood still, waiting for it to resume. Instead we hear just heavy footsteps, not crashing or rustling like a bear or a pig does, but heavy pacing. I turn to my friend and ask if she wants to go back. She didn't know, but wanted to get out of there. So we keep on our journey to the dock with the unnatural growling/rumbling following us, coupled with the heavy paces. I'm terrified by this point, instinctively reaching for my right hip to find a blank space where a holster should be. I had left my pistol locked in the glove box. I grab my pocket knife, and palm it aggressively. The rumbling continues, almost impacting the air with its weight. We hasten our pace and it matches ours, but never coming out of the woods to show itself. This continues for about 300 yards. The entire time I am absolutely terrified. I've been hunting and camping since I was 6 and I've never heard a sound like this one or even had an experience similar. Finally, arriving to the dock, she sprints out to the edge and I grab a handful of rocks and go sit beside her. For the next 15 minutes it circles the area around the dock landing, emanating the rumbles and growls. Nothing we can do, it's dark, I have no firearm and we can't see it. I call my buddy Dennis who lives 5 minutes away. The rumbling and pacing continues, roughly 30 to 40 yards away from us, but it doesn't step foot on the dock. Finally I see headlights come up over the trees and the rumbling fades into darkness. Dennis comes walking down, cradling a rifle, and that was the end of that. Really freaked me out for a couple of months. I'm a believer in cryptozoology now. I don't know if Bigfoot exists, but something does that may be similar, especially considering most cultures have their monster. I haven't told this to anyone but my brother because he knows where this place is. There are remote cypress swamps along the Pearl River in central Mississippi, and some of them become inaccessible due to flooding during hunting season. The remoteness of some of these places create ideal situations for a hunter willing to put in the extra effort, and I have hunted these woods and swamps for years and know them well. Even though it's a bad idea, when I was younger I was confident enough to hunt back in there alone. One afternoon during duck season, a front was coming in and I knew if I could get to Deal Island that it would be a good day. I put on my chest waders and rode my four-wheeler down an overgrown logging trail in the swamp to the edge of the flood. I waited a couple of sloughs and got to a particular honey hole where I could slay them. I did, and it was good. But when it came time to wade back out, I got a sense of unease that I could not explain. The weather was odd because even though the temp was dropping and a front was expected, everything was absolutely still and quiet. If you have ever been alone in a swamp at night you will know what I mean, but everything is different when you can only see what's in the cone of light from your flashlight. I wasn't worried because my light was good and, hell, I was carrying a 12-gauge shotgun. But, still, something kept making the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I was being watched and I could feel it. Sound carries funny in the swamp, but the sloshing noises I was making was the only thing I could hear. It was echoing back to me in funny ways, and when I stopped to adjust the strap on the bag of decoys, the sloshing echo did not stop when it should have. Okay. There is something else in the swamp. No big deal. Some deer or hog will realize I am human in a minute and move away. Except it didn't. I would move for a bit and then stop and listen. The sound of something else out there would also stop, but it was getting closer. Not normal. The cone of my flashlight made the trees and tangled brush cast long, scraggly shadows that moved with me as I tried to hurry out of the swamp. My knuckles were turning white on that Remington 870 and I was wishing it was loaded with something heftier than No. 2 steel shot. I noticed a very bad smell, like skunk except much worse, and stopped again to listen and shine my light around. I noticed how the shadows continued to move, but holy fucking crap, I'm not moving. Why are the goddamn shadows moving? A limb snapped, and when I spun around to face it, something that was not there made a soft hissing noise. The beam of my light just ended in a shape of nothingness that was not there. A breath of stench hit my face and I heard that hissing sound again, and I got the fuck out of that swamp. I was shaking and drenched in sweat when I got back to the truck, and those woods did not feel like my woods anymore. When I say it was something that was not there, that is the only way I can describe it. My light hit it, and there was shadow behind it, but there was nothing there. Something in that swamp scared the crap out of me, and I do not want to know what it was. Not a hunter but a backpacker. This story almost belongs on No Sleep, but I swear it's real. Hiking along a section of the PCT with my aunt and dog, after 3 days we found ourselves at an impassable river crossing with the dog and have to head back. Reluctant to go over the mountain passes we just did, we pulled out our map and find what seems to be an interesting trail through the Ansel Adams wilderness that will put us back where we started. We go to a resupply point, got some dinner and a shower, and ask if we can get a four-wheeler ride up the road to the trailhead. They say nobody goes up that road and we couldn't get one, but a man on vacation with his family offers to help up out. We drive about 2 miles up the road and it proves to be so washed out, it becomes impossible to drive further, so we thank him for his help and continue on foot. We walk another 3 miles or so to the trailhead and find it completely destroyed by fallen over trees, and it looks like no one has been there for decades. Turns out this was an old logging road used in that area before it became a wilderness area 50 or 60 years ago. So we start hiking down the trail another 4 miles until we camp for the night. Along this trail we see nothing but bear tracks and deer tracks, no people tracks, horses, or anything. We even stumble on a bear in the middle of taking a dump on the side of the trail and scare him off. From our camp the road/trail gets really tough. It was about 6 miles of climbing over giant fir trees one after another. We finally reached an opening and followed it for about another mile until amazingly we couldn't believe it, but we came up on a 2-story building way out there in the middle of nowhere, 15 miles from the nearest people and 50 from any civilization. This place was super eerie. The house was straight out of the Blair Witch, and it must have been there since before it became a wilderness area. This where thing got weird. We found a sign here for our trail that pointed directly into thick brush and bushes. This is when we knew we were a little screwed. We decided that we should just go for it anyway. We were too far to turn back now, and luckily we had a GPS to help guide us even without a trail. So we go through the bushes and follow what used to be a trail. We get about another mile or so down the trail before I notice barefoot human prints. Let me remind you that I've been seeing bear prints and cougar prints along this trail the whole time. These were human. I put my size 11 hiking shoe over it and they were the same size and shape, and asked my aunt if I was going crazy and she agreed it was human. We walked another 500 yards down the trail with human prints leading us to what looked like either a dump or a homeless camp. There was a tarp strung up, trash bags piled up, and garbage scattered all over next to the creek. Nope. Fuck that. No more investigating this creepy place in the middle of nowhere. We just hiked as fast as we could, continuing up the hill and away from that place as possible, with the eerie feeling that someone was watching us for miles. We continued the way we did, hiking with no trail for another 12 miles until we reached a maintained trail on the other side of the pass along some really pretty areas that probably haven't been seen in years. But seeing a homeless/Bigfoot camp in the middle of nowhere was not one of them. We have around 200 acres of woodland. Me and my dad live on the front end of the property, and on the back side of the property we have a rustic hunting cabin. No water or electricity. The back end of our property also sits on the edge of a state forest. You have to travel something like 12 miles before you reach any kind of road or trail. Several years back during deer hunting season, my dad and I were sitting around the campfire back at our hunting cabin. It was near dusk and we were done hunting for the day, just relaxing. We both saw something moving in the sky that caught our attention. A larger purple shape about the size of a small car was floating along just above the tree line. So this is going to sound completely made up. However, when I was younger, my father bought a plot of reclaimed coal mines land. It was quite literally in the midst of hundreds of acres of wilderness. Me and my younger brother would play in the woods around our house, and we found some interesting stuff. There was an old wooden wagon that was broken down and rotting that we found. We also found what looked like the remnants of an old cable pulley system with wooden buckets attached to it. The thing that scared me the most happened to me and my best friend at the time. We were outside playing basketball when these shadowy figures appeared at the edge of the forest. There were 4 of them and they were completely black except for their eyes. It was like a pinprick through paper that when you shine a light on it, the paper is the shadow and hole is this area of light. That's what their eyes looked like. They knew us by name and called out to us. They were calling us over to them. We ran away into the house and didn't come out for a long time. This happened when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I guess I repressed it, but I kept having this memory of these shadow people and my friend. At first I thought it was just a dream that I'd had, but the memory was persistent. When I was much older, I believe mid-20s, I was with my friend and told him that I had a question that I needed to ask him. I told him that it was going to sound crazy, but it happened while we were playing basketball when we were younger. He instantly answered, saying the shadow people at the edge of the woods. It completely threw me. He verified that it had truly happened without me really asking about it. It still shakes me to this day when I think about it. Not a hunter, but grew up in a house where my backyard was a huge forest in rural Illinois. When I was a kid, I loved being outdoors and would take every possible opportunity to run amok in the woods with my best friend. When we were younger, 11 to 12, we stayed closer to the house and the outskirts and climbed the trees. As we got older, 13 to 15, we would venture deep, walking and swimming in the rivers and building little forts. When I was 16, the forest was roped off and closed off to the public, as a company had began illegally dumping lead, or mercury, into the woods, but that's another story. It was the middle of a hot summer, and I was about 15 at the time. Dusk was approaching and my friend had to go home for dinner, but I wasn't quite ready to leave. We parted ways, and I climbed up a tree near my favorite spot over the river. Now, these woods backed up to a local gun club, so it wasn't uncommon to hear shooting. However, this gun club was contained in its own private property and the members never ventured out into the forest. I sat in my tree for a little bit and ate the blackberries I'd picked earlier while watching it get darker, when I suddenly spotted movement out of the corner of my eye. At first I assumed it was a younger deer because it was larger but not huge, but I quickly realized it was a man. He seemed to be in his late 30s or early 40s, and he wore a black t-shirt and camo pants with creepy, wiry facial hair. He was skulking, like he didn't want to be seen. I thought this was odd, but had no intention of making my presence known since something felt wrong, and being a 15-year-old girl alone in the woods I knew I was at a disadvantage. I slowed my breath down and watched. At first he didn't say anything as he walked around the base of the trees. It was around that time that I realized he had a gun slung over his back. Once he got near the river where my friend and I had been loudly goofing off maybe 10 minutes earlier, he started calling out, "Hey! Anyone here? Help?" while grabbing his rifle. When there was no response and no noise, he gave up after a few minutes and began walking downstream. I waited until it was pitch black before sliding out of that tree as quietly as I could, running home, and having my parents call the cops. They never found anything. I could never bring myself to go back. I've got something pretty freaky. Last summer in Alaska, a buddy of mine was on a fly fishing trip. He is one of my good friends, very honest, big conservationist, and sort of innocent in his demeanor. He wouldn't hurt a fly. Just an all-around great guy. Anyway, he is camping in the backcountry as he is rafting his way down the river back to town. On his raft, and camping with him, were 2 girls, and 1 other guy. So one night on this trip they are camping and hanging out at the fire and pretty close to going to sleep, so they are working on putting the fire out. At this point, everyone at camp saw the silhouette of a stocky man and a dog. From what my friend says, this man starts mumbling at them and they can't tell what he's saying. He is about 20 feet away from my buddy and his campmates. My friend and the other guy go to confront him. He seemed like he was in a panic, and my friend said there was definitely something wrong with him mentally. He starts talking about how he is a messenger from God and how he had the solution. No one knew what he was talking about. He ends up walking his way back to the campsite, to the dismay of the group. The girls are obviously freaked out and scared and told my friend he needed to leave, something about him just felt wrong and troublesome. My friend said his dog was nice, but again, this stranger starts talking about how he is a disciple from God. Then, he pulled out a gaming laptop and started showing my friend some code he wrote, but didn't pay too much attention to. He mentioned to me that the stranger isn't aggressive, just off-putting. It's worth noting, he only had a small backpack and no serious outdoor gear. He told my friend that he wanders the woods and occasionally heads into town. So eventually, they convince him to leave camp, telling the stranger they were going to bed. He agrees to leave. But 3 hours later they hear something outside the tent that sounds like a man yelling "Yo woo," and they come outside to find the campfire roaring again. The whole group stayed up the rest of the night with their bear spray and continued the camping trip downstream the next morning. Every time my friend has told me this story he is visibly disturbed. My friend still wonders what he was doing out there with only a dog, no gear, and miles into the woods. Whack. My dad's found deer corpses totally shredded on his 17 acres in Indiana. Once or twice we've found the skulls, antlers, and skin and hooves left in a pile, but no bones or meat. Our dogs used to play with the random empty corpses. Sometimes a blood trail just ends out of nowhere in the middle of a clearing, or a deer will jump past a tree in sight and just disappear. Doesn't show up on the other side of the tree. My dad was worried for a long time that his crazy neighbors were hunting on his land, but he hasn't found any other evidence. Also, my brother and I once went into a state park we lived in here in Ohio. Like 10 to 15 minutes into the woods we realized the floor of the forest was crunching beneath our feet. There were thousands and thousands of small animal skeletons, mice and squirrels and moles and even a couple coons and possums, their bones just scattered in a layer on the ground. We also found a large, circular, sunken down concrete thing in a pit that was surrounded by rusty barbed wire fencing with a sign that said U.S. government property, do not trespass under penalty of law. There's some weird ass shit in the woods around here. Not me, but my 2 uncles on my father's side of the family. The story goes that they were out dove hunting in the brush country in Atascosa County, Texas one late afternoon. If you're not familiar with the South Texas area, the brush country is a very odd place. It's essentially where the desert terrain of Mexico's northern areas meet with the central Texas hill country. Not many tall trees aside from the common oak tree, but the landscape is riddled with thorn bushes, mesquite trees, tall yellow grass, and paddle cactus. I've always found it to be a very hostile environment just to explore off the beaten path. Anyway, my 2 uncles are out hunting, shotguns in hand, quietly pacing through the animal trails and thorn brush, ready for a dove or quail to leap up from the tall grass. A couple hours go by and they've bagged a few birds and decide to call it a day and begin walking back to their vehicles to drive back into town. I believe they lived in Jourdanton/Pleasanton at the time. The sun is beginning to set and they're wading through the tall grass across an opening in the large brush, laughing and shooting the shit when they come across a small glowing object that's just nestled on the ground as if it's been placed in the tall grass for them to come across. From what I remember my father telling me about their recollection, the object was the size of a soccer ball and was slowly pulsating a very bright reddish-orange light, but wasn't giving off any heat that they could feel. Apparently they were too frightened to get any closer to it than several feet, so neither of them actually touched it. They were unable to decipher what it was and simply walked around it to continue their trek towards the vehicles, where they quickly hopped into their trucks and hightailed it back to town. I've been told it may have been a meteorite, which is the most plausible explanation, but they never found out for sure. I'll ask my father about it tomorrow, to see if there's anyone else interested in learning more about what they saw that day. Near where I go to school there's a massive state park that is rumored to have an old Air Force research facility in the back corner of it. The front part is visited frequently by hikers, hunters and whatnot. But if you wander into the back of it far enough you find some really creepy stuff, from meth heads to cults to estranged citizens. A couple of good ones come to mind. The ROTC program used to do field training out there once a semester, and part of it is a land navigation course. That pretty much consisted of the cadets out in the woods by themselves for around 5 to 6 hours navigating the land. I've heard from multiple people they'll be walking to their next point or take a break on a tree and find human skeletons or bones. Another one that happened to me when some friends and I were hunting/exploring one weekend. We were wandering through woods when we came up to a clearing. In the clearing is this old run-down and almost abandoned church. We didn't really think anything of it at first, but we noticed that there were things off with it. First, the cross on the steeple was upside down. Then we noticed there were no windows on the building itself at all. We were about to come out of the clearing to have a look around when the door opened to it and a man in black robes came out for a minute and then went back inside. That's when we booked it out of there. Not hunting but airsoft with my friends in the woods. Still scary enough though. I was in 7th or 8th grade when me and about 15 of my friends and acquaintances went into the woods by the highway. To ensure no one saw that there were kids with airsoft guns and camo shooting each other, we trekked deep into the woods. No highway car could be heard, so we knew it was far enough. We eventually came across this old single-roomed house. The windows were boarded up with wood, the door had about 5 padlocks, and the pool out back was green with algae. Grass overgrew any remnants of a driveway through the dense forest. Peeking through the wood boards found broken furniture and the floor caked in dirt. The guy who organized the hangout lived nearby and assured us all that the owners hadn't been at the house for 10 years, they were old and presumed dead. With no concerns, we finally played airsoft for a couple hours. Needing a break, we all rendezvoused back at the house. As we approached we could hear the faint sound of an engine. Nobody could even tell a car was approaching at first because of the thick brush. Sure enough, a black car was rolling around the corner. Pulling up to our group, the driver lowers the passenger window. An old man driving and an old man behind him. The passenger was an elderly woman with another elderly woman behind her. Everyone in the car was dressed in all black formal clothes. They practically started screaming at us to get away. Literally almost shrieking, but it also sounded angry. We tried to apologize for trespassing, but then the driver started reaching for something in the glove box. We all ran out of there. Their eyes were so grayish blue it was almost transparent. The hair was whiter than snow. The black tuxedos and dresses were vampiric looking. To this day, I think they were cultists. I'll never know and I'll never forget. Was hunting down in Stephenville, Texas during whitetail season. I was up in a tripod overlooking a pasture. Behind me about 50 yards away was a dry riverbed, but you couldn't see it because a dense screen of trees grew along both sides of the riverbed, but you could hike to it, and there was another spot I would sometimes hunt on the other side. It was getting late, but there was still a decent amount of light. I had seen absolutely nothing that day, not even critters. So I'm sitting up in my tripod just watching when all of a sudden from behind me in or around the riverbed I hear the most ungodly shriek/howl/roar that made my hair stand on end, and I damn well near peed my pants. It continued for about 3 minutes until it suddenly stopped, and that's about when I decided to call it a night. Ran the whole way back to my vehicle. I didn't see it, and to this day I still wonder what it was. Didn't sound like a bobcat or coyote, and Stephenville isn't exactly known for its big cats or any cryptids. Maybe some of you hunters out there have experienced something similar? Not a hunter but live in Finland, so it's pretty much all forest here. When I was a kid I went for cross-country biking nearby to our home. There is a roughly 2 kilometers, 1,5 miles, loop of a forest path in the forest. It is rideable if a bit difficult at some points. After just riding couple of minutes on a narrow forest path I see a figure walking ahead of me. It looks like a hooded elderly lady walking really slowly. I cannot see her face or anything, just a dark hood covering her. I recall she being very tall, but I was also just 13 years old, so she could have been normal size. I drove just behind her, but the path is too narrow to overtake her from any of her sides. Also, I get this heavy feeling on my chest telling me not to try to overtake her. I can't explain it, but something just felt very off when I got closer to her. I stop my bike and get off and watch her walk ahead of me. I then think that this is silly and she must be startled if she turns around and sees me there. So I think to act cool and turn down to pick up a blueberry. I pick it up, raise my head back to the road ahead of me, and there is nothing. I can see the path ahead maybe 50 meters, and it's just impossible that she would have never done that distance within those 5 seconds I wasn't watching. I then try to reason this with and think that she must have jumped off road, since there is extremely thick bushes and I cannot see there. I felt a bit uneasy about this but decide to continue. I ride my bike about 500 meters more and there is a cliff where I can see down the road ahead another 500 meters. And there she is, I can see her walking there again really slowly. Again, tall figure covered in a dark hood, I cannot see her face or anything but the hood she is wearing. And she is walking slowly on the road. I really couldn't figure out how she made it there in such a short time, since even I couldn't do the distance in that time even with my bike. I am extremely alarmed at this point but decide to continue. I drive the hill down into the spot where I saw her before. Again there is nothing. At this part of the forest it is more open and I can see quite far in any direction. Yet she is nowhere to be seen, and yet there she was just 30 seconds before. I continue my trip and finally finish my first loop of the trail and decide to go yet another round. After going for a couple of minutes there she is, exactly the same spot I saw her at the first time, again tall dark hooded. Walking slowly. I got totally freaked out after this. I rode off the woods as fast as I could and in a total panic ride to my friend's home, which was further away from the woods than my own home. Until today I have no idea what I saw and it gives me the chills when I remember her figure. I'm not a hunter or anything, but my boyfriend is, but these stories are not about hunting. Where my mom's house is, there is a river that runs behind it with nothing but forest surrounding it. Some truly creepy shit has happened to us and some friends more than once down there at the river. First story. We are halfway down the trail that leads to this river. With Robert and a few other friends. My mom's didn't like a lot of people over at her house. We are just hanging out talking and bullshitting around and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it sounded as if a horse neighed. But more like a laugh. And everyone in our small group heard it. So we noped out of there and go back to my mom's, and are in my mom's yard. And we all hear it again, clear as day, a horse neighing laugh. At the very beginning of the trail. The beginning of the trail is adjacent to my mom's yard. It gave us all chills and we couldn't logically explain it. No one in the neighborhood owns horses, nor has there ever been any in that neighborhood. Second story. Again we, Tim and our friends, were in the trail of the river. This time we were walking down to the river. It was midsummer and a lot of people were down there. We were looking forward to swimming and having a fun time. We get halfway down the trail, and we all see a solid black wolf sitting in the middle of the trail near the end of it, facing us. I remember it clearly. It has yellow eyes, and gray around its snout like it was older. This was at 12 p.m. to 12:30 p.m. on a bright, sunny day and people were in the water. You could hear them laughing and splashing. We all stop in our tracks and stare at it. About 5 people just staring in silence at this black wolf, scared to move or make any noise. It stares at us back. And I shit you not, it fucking grinned at us. Not a typical dog grin where they pant and have their mouth open. No, this was more like a sinister, mischievous grin with sharp teeth and bright yellow eyes. It made my stomach turn. We were about 50 feet from it, and after about 5 minutes it stopped grinning, and it simply got up on its hind legs and walked away as if it was a human. We all just looked at each other, asking if we all saw it, and everyone saw the exact same thing. I believe we came across a skinwalker that day. I didn't tell my friends that's what it was, but I knew that's what it was. We said screw swimming that day and left. That was the last time we ever went to that river again. Raised by hunters, so I know enough, but I've only ever been unsuccessfully deer hunting. My family had a cabin up in the mountain range near San Jose, Mount Hamilton, and we would go up every summer and winter for a few days, and it's far out, 27 miles on asphalt and 9 miles on a dirt road, no electricity and no cell service unless you were on the asphalt road, so pretty far out. We had a couple of creepy places around the cabin. One was Snake Rock, which admittedly wasn't that weird, it was just absolutely infested with snakes, hundreds of them, no other creatures around, and you always felt weird around it. Another was the Winna-Itch's shack, which was this even farther shack from us that the family had moved out to get away from society, and they supposedly died out in the cabin. When I was roughly 16 or 17, old enough to go on the trail alone so long as I had a rifle with me, I rode our ATV to the cabin, and I always was skeeved out in that place. The shack was always louder inside than out, like an absolute cacophony of noise, but I'll never forget checking it out and finding a shredded carcass of something in on the table. Looked like maybe a raccoon or skunk. Gutted. Flies everywhere, maybe a few days old, and my heart starts pounding in my chest. I could hear my blood pressure in my ears sound like rushing water, because the cabin may be old, but it's got what I would consider animal-proof entryways except for small rodents and maybe larger vermin. But I hopped on the ATV and noped so hard, and I got the sensation to stop up ahead, like just a second to stop and listen, with the ATV off about 100 yards from the cabin, and as soon as I stop I realized that it's dead silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. I could feel my hair stand up, and I was like, nope, fuck this, I'm gone. I've never rode that ATV so fucking fast. I got back to the cabin and my grandfather asked me if I was okay, and I explained what I saw, and I've never seen him so concerned. We ended up deciding to cut the trip short and head out, and when we came back a few weeks later we both went to the cabin, and whatever was on the table was gone. It just left a huge pool of blood and fur. When we were teenagers backpacking, we found an old abandoned radio tower in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by grazing land far from any homes or farmsteads. There was a overgrown 2-track forestry road and a few cows off, maybe a 1/4 mile in the distance, no fences or gates. It was getting dark, so naturally, being asshole kids, we decided to break into it. Maybe camp there or something. Mostly just being troublemakers. Inside we were immediately creeped the fuck out. There were ripped up stuffed animals everywhere, porno mags scattered all over, trash, sex toy packaging, a hammer or axe handle duct taped to a post, used rubber gloves, pieces of rope strewn about. All kinds of nasty shit. We promptly got the fuck out of there after a few minutes of poking around, and when we went back outside it was basically full dark, and all those cows that were off in the distance were standing in and around the road staring at us. It was creepy as fuck. We hiked all night by moonlight and flashlight to get the hell away from that place. Eventually finding a nice spot on some high ground as the sun was coming up. We slept a few hours and decided to cut the trip short and to head back out to the truck. Still had to spend another night to get back out cause we were so far in and the terrain was so rugged. We were half expecting the truck to be vandalized or get kidnapped by some crazy deliverance rapist or something. It never stopped me from going back out, but it was a harsh realization that crazy fucked up people are the biggest threat in the wilderness. I was heading out to an abandoned farmhouse to hang out and drink some beers with 4 friends. Dark as hell in the middle of the woods. You have to follow the old overgrown driveway that starts where the road ends, like a mile back. You can't drive back there anymore, it's like 30 years overgrown. The house belonged to the parents of the next closest house that's about 3 miles away as the crow flies. I know them, and they're okay with us going back there, so we weren't trespassing. Anyway, we're walking back there with a couple flashlights, and we were loud and should have scared any wildlife off well before we got close to see anything. Out of nowhere there's this giant ghost dog the size of a side-by-side ATV. I mean full-on blue-green glowing kinda shaggy dog in the middle of the woods. This animal is huge. No bears in that part of the country either, which is the only thing I could compare it to size-wise. And we were close before we saw it, maybe 20 to 30 yards, it was just there. Its movements were loud against the ground and brush, but made no sound itself. You could feel it move. We stopped, it paused, looked at us and ran off. Then it was just gone, like it only ran maybe 10 to 15 yards before just nothing. We turned tail and noped the hell out of there. We did go back, during the day. Not sure what we were looking for evidence-wise, but we never did find anything. I never went back there in the dark though. I'm a rational person, I acknowledge I have a limit to my intelligence and experience. I've seen shit I cannot rationally explain. This, by far, I had no frame of reference for. There's a spot in Kentucky, in the Daniel Boone National Forest, that always has and always will creep me out. My father has told me stories of him fishing around dusk with his cousin in this place. A branch of the local lake leads out this way through the hills. This one time they're out fishing and about head home when they start hearing noises coming from the surrounding forest. Keep in mind there's a dead-end road here and there's only one way in and out of this canyon. There are no houses and no other roads into this place. Out from the woods people come, and they don't say a word. My dad claims that they looked unwashed, clothes torn, just staring them down. Like something out of Deliverance. I guess my dad or his cousin flashed a pistol and they both just backed off toward their truck and drove off. This other time I'm camping out there with a friend. This is sort of toward the end of the same road, which would be maybe 5 to 6 miles long until it hits a dead end. As we're sitting around the fire around midnight, we begin to hear forest noises. No big deal, right? Could be a deer or a raccoon or possum or something shuffling about. Then we begin to hear splashes further away in the water. It sounded like maybe a carp was splashing around, and it sounded pretty far off at that. No big deal. The shuffling gets louder from all sides and the splashing increases in volume as well as frequency until it feels like something is right on top of us. We have no idea what, so we drop everything and hop in my truck and drive off. After many discussions, we have never arrived at a conclusion and we have never gone back. I used to hunt to fit in with the family many years ago. Didn't care for it. Wasn't good at it. Went and did it anyways. One of my first kills was a fawn. It was awful. I didn't mean to shoot a fawn. There was a whole herd of whitetail scattered around a field that we stumbled upon. The bastard donor I was with wasn't into hunting properly, so we came upon them driving, at dusk, and he demanded I hop out of the vehicle and shoot at them from the truck door. I shot at the first brown thing that came into my sights. He was standing half behind a hilltop and I thought I'd shot at the doe. I was wrong, and, let me tell you, there is nothing like watching an entire herd of whitetail scatter except for one lone doe who stays behind, standing there and calling loudly for her baby. I'll never forget how horrible it was. She didn't leave when we started approaching the fawn either. I got the gut-wrenching experience of watching her baby try to get up and run to her, but be entirely unable to because her front end was mangled, while she cried out for it more and more frantically. Eventually she ran when we got too close, but she didn't go far. She stayed at the tree line while the bastard donor fired round after round point blank into the fawn's neck, missing each time and putting the animal in more and more distress. He was breaking its back, he said. He didn't. Eventually, it just bled out. I don't know when the doe left. She was gone when the fawn died. I was never able to go out into the fields after that. I'd questioned the family's hunting abilities for years at that point. I'd had concerns about their practices before, but seeing firsthand how ruthless, dangerous, and cruel so-called experienced hunters could be, and being thrown into the situation of being a danger myself, left me terrified of being in the trees/fields with someone like that ever again. I'm still a massive supporter of safe, legal hunting, and I completely understand the appeal of it as both a sport and a lifestyle. A freezer full of meat saves a lot of money. I'm thrilled when friends score a big hunt. I love seeing records set. But I'm also a huge advocate against any sort of poaching, improper gun use, and immoral hunting. People need to be educated about what they're doing and how. They need to understand the gravity that is killing another living thing. Yes, hunting can be thrilling, beneficial, and a great experience. But it's not like hockey or soccer or any other sport. It's dangerous and deadly. It's grim and disgusting. You either do it right, or you don't do it at all. I don't care how much fun you're having. You're involved in an activity with a lot of responsibilities, and, if you can't fulfill that, you have no right to kill another living being. Couple that with how many people have died out where I live due to completely preventable hunting accidents, because so many people are like the bastard donor and worse, and you couldn't pay me enough to go back out there again. I was in Montana in the mountains near Melrose in the Butte area. Me and my buddy had seen a herd of elk a couple days before and then saw them again along the mountain the next day as well, so we decided to head up a day or two after since we both had tags still. After a day of hunting and seeing nothing, we decided to split up, and he would go walk down one side and I would walk another. We were going to meet back up at the truck. It's about 5 and dusk is starting to settle in, so I decided to head back. On my way down, in the middle of the woods, I could hear this continuous sound, but I could tell what it was as I started to come around a bend. I could make out the faint sound of someone singing. I stopped to listen and was sure it was music, but I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. I continued to walk and was half expecting to run into another hunter listening to music. I went around a bend and could hear the music much louder. I was 100% sure it was a radio or something at this point. I walked a little bit farther and there was a battery-powered radio sitting on a downed tree. There was no one around. I decided not to hang around wondering about it and was pretty weirded out at this point. So I climbed over the log that the radio was on so as to keep going on my way. When I got over the log, on the other side was a tipped-over box full of all different types of women's underwear and like half a dozen kids' dolls all arranged in a circle. The radio was an old tape player and had the same song over and over. I walked my ass out of there till I was far enough away, then I started running the rest of the way back. It was the weirdest shit ever. I always remembered the song playing, but didn't know what it was called till I heard it again a few years later. It was Skeeter Davis' The End of the World. I can't hear that song without getting chills now, not that I often hear it. About 15 years ago I was backpacking in the Eastern Sierras with a group of about 10 people. We were well above the 10,000 feet elevation mark at this point. We came upon a small lake and decided to do some fishing. It was getting late, so we wanted to start making some food. We caught a few fish and decided to cook and eat what we caught. Keep in mind that we are above the timberline and miles away from any trailhead or any civilization. Out of nowhere, while we were sitting around our campfire, an older woman, roughly 65 to 70 years old, just walks up on us. This must have been 9:30-ish at night. She just takes a seat in the middle of our group and doesn't say anything. She had long gray hair and she just stared into our fire. We were super creeped out at this point. One guy in our group finally asked her if we could help her with something. She didn't respond back. She just stared into the fire. The same guy asked her if she knew where she was. At this point she turned and looked right at me and asked, "Are you going to eat that?" Referring to the leftover carcass of the fish I had caught. It was just the head and fish bones at this point. I told her no. She walked over to me and picked the carcass off of my plate and ate the fish head right in front of me. She said this fuels our body. Which really creeped all of us out big time. She promptly got up and walked off into the dead of night. We cut our excursion short and packed out shit up and got the fuck out of there.